Well, despite the heat, we're coming up on elk season here in the Rockies in just a few weeks, but some of us can't seem to wait. Our host, Joseph Von Benedikt, traveled over to Scotland to hunt the original elk, the Red Stag. And doing so, he discovered what the most popular cartridge is for that kind of hunting over there, and you might be pleasantly surprised and a little bit proud to know that it's an American cartridge. Let's join Joseph as he battles midges to find himself a Red Stag in Scotland.
Whether you're hunting elk in the Great Rocky Mountains or red stags in Scotland, Argentina, or New Zealand, or even Germany, it's very important to choose the right rifle and a great cartridge, such as the grand old 30-06. Now you might think that the 30-06 is where really good elk cartridges began back in 1906, but I'll wager that you're not correct. Let's look into it. We're here on a beautiful morning in Scotland, and we're going stag stalking in the Highlands. We're using a very modern cartridge, the 6.5 Creedmoor, to shoot these Scottish stags, which are really about the size of a large mule deer in the Rocky Mountains where I grew up. But we had a great discussion last night about the various cartridges that are used for stags, and that's one thing I'm here as a investigative journalist to investigate on this hunt. As you know, I'm a disciple of cartridges and projectiles and performance. I'm here with my wonderful chum, Rob Gearing of Spartan Precision Equipment, and Sam, the stalker on this Highland estate. He's a little bit discreet about his name sometimes, but it's Sam Thompson. You can find him under Real Sam Thompson on Instagram. Yes. And he's the head stalker for this beautiful estate. We'll be climbing the hill, going up the hill, as they say. I'm told whether it's a mountain or a small hill.
Never a mountain.
Never a mountain. Never a mountain here in Scotland.
Yeah.
In search of a red stag. So in the States, it could be argued that the 30-06 was our first really great elk hunting cartridge, right? We had the 45-70 and a bunch of single shot cartridges for the Sharps rifles and rolling block rifles and so forth, but the first really great bottlenecked cartridge that shot authoritative bullets and killed elk at distances that we were, previously unfamiliar with, I would argue is a 30-06, and it's still a very valid choice today. In my research, of course, this is, the UK, and then we're talking as well about the continent, the European continent. I've kind of formed a personal opinion that maybe the first really great red stag cartridge was the 7x57 Mauser. And you told me, here in England you call it the 257 Rigby typically, but you've told me you've shot or seen quite a few stags in that with that cartridge.
Yeah, it's certainly.
Come on over here. We're working off my mic. Why don't you fine gentlemen change spots, and there you go.
Sort of when I started my career a while ago, there was more of them around still, and they were a very popular choice. Really until the 270 sort of took over from it, but there was a lot of the older estate rifles. So most estates will have their own rifles that will be used by the estate owner's family, their guests, paying clients, and 7x57 was a very popular choice, very popular choice for that, and still is for some people. You see it quite a lot in guests that come from Africa. A lot of them have brought 7x57s, and they work really well. Probably nowadays, I would say that in the last sort of 30 years, the 270 has certainly been probably the caliber of choice across most of the Highlands. And the Creedmoor now is gaining huge popularity, with a few people shooting 6.5 PRCs as well, and various other bits and bobs.
Sure.
But generally, I think in Scotland, everything from sort of the 243 up to the 30 cal Magnums is used fairly regularly. There's a lot of variety, and most of them work well. The 30-06 is a great choice for the Highlands.
Yeah. 243 is a little bit light though, isn't it?
It's not a cartridge that I would use. It is a little bit light, especially when the stags are in the rut and they're pumped up full of adrenaline. If you've got to take a quartering shot or anything like that, I think those 100 grain bullets are a wee bit light for me.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
For elk, it's much the same thing, but here's the cool thing, folks, is our 30-06 was more or less inspired by the 7x57 when the Mexicans were shooting at our boys when Theodore Roosevelt charged up San Juan Hill, and his boys were using the 30-40 Craig, which was still a fairly young cartridge to the American military, but they felt like they were profoundly outgunned by the faster yet lighter recoiling and so flatter shooting 7x57 Mauser. And he went back to the War Department and said, we need a real cartridge, so get back to work and figure it out. And the 30-06 was the result of that. But the 7x57 Mauser, of course, came along several years before the 30-06, inspired it. I like to sometimes think of it as the genesis of the really great hunting cartridges that we have for red stag and elk today.
This is what we'll call a spy point. This is pretty much our only one that we can actually drive up to because our hydroelectric turbine's up here, which produces all the power for the estate because we're totally off-grid. And it's a really good place to start our stalk, especially with a mixed wind like we've got today, the wind being very important in hill stalking. And by coming up here, you can probably see around a third of the ground in front of us, I would suggest. And it's quite good because we can see a lot of what we call the North Forest. So the estate splits by the river down in the bottom into two different stalking beats, which we'll call forests or beats, depending how you like it. And normally we'll have one party out on one side and one party out on the other side. Because there's only us out today, it means we can go wherever we like. And arguably I'm the boss, so I can go wherever I like anyway. But we'll come up here, we'll spend a huge amount of time glassing. You can sit up here for an hour some days looking at different groups of deer. But the kind of the crucial thing, you were very, very quick in your spying of a group of deer just on this ridge in front of us as we came up. And this is hind ground. So this area here is called the home face, and that's almost always a hind area. The hinds take most of the good grazing, probably the similar with elk.
Sure.
And that they'll take that good grazing, that good shelter, and they'll use that. The fact that we're seeing hinds moving back into this area when our wind was strong easterly yesterday, which is the worst wind we can have. We like a westerly, southwesterly wind across virtually all of Scotland, but especially here. With that wind change to the east, this area was completely bereft of deer yesterday. There was nothing on it. We're due a wind change today, this evening, tomorrow morning, perhaps. And so the fact that those deer have moved back into their sort of normal range is a good sign for me. I like that. And we can spy our way out to the northern march, which is what we call a boundary. So you'll talk about marches rather than boundaries, or there's no fence lines. There are no fences on the property keeping deer in. The only fences you'll see are excluding deer from areas that we're trying to grow woodland. And then we'll grow it to a certain age, and then we'll take the fence down so that the deer have access to it in most cases. So this area here, that's sort of our high point on the estate up there. And the northern march up there, and that's a good area for stags at this time of year. They'll be in larger bachelor herds, so we might see groups of 5 or 10 stags, but we might see groups of 150 stags, just depending on how they're moving in the landscape, their environmental factors. If next door shot deer yesterday, we shot deer yesterday, how that's moved populations and how they've reacted to that. So you'll generally find that you might stalk with a bit of a plan. You might, meet guests in the morning and go out. I think I'm going to go out here today. But especially at the moment, early in the season when the wind's very changeable, you want to get as much information as possible, kind of like you guys do with sitting and glassing. The advantage that we've got is that you're sitting and looking at a view that we look at very often. So you sort of immediately know where to expect those deer to be and which areas you can stalk into, which areas are a real challenge to stalk into, which areas will suit someone with good level of fitness as a guest, which areas will suit someone with a poorer level of fitness, or even just as simpler things as, this morning there was a cyclist that we saw. So if there's a cyclist, where's he gone? How might that move the deer? All these factors we can kind of feed in at this early planning stage. You'll see that the lads, the gillies, they're glassing quite hard. We'll all sit and scan. On a nice day like this, when it's not raining, it's quite a lovely thing to do, and it gives us an idea, a kind of a start of that plan making process, is to decide where we might want to go. And it might be that you can't see any deer before you start stalking, and you've got to rely on a bit of intuition and a bit of perhaps guesswork from me, and we'll go, right, well, I think there'll be stags in there, so we'll go in there. But the best case scenario is always that you can spy a deer, you can make a plan, you can hopefully assess the type of deer in that herd and whether there's a shootable stag, and then you can stalk from there.
So saying shootable stag, Sam, is probably good to just explain, because we're not after the biggest trophy, are we?
Right.
No, we're looking for a good cull animal that you can take. And that could be that it's a really good stag that's old and he's past his best. We call that going back. And if a stag's going back, he'll still hold hinds through the rut. He'll still try and cover those hinds, but his fertility will be lower. So the chance of a high yield of calves next year and a recruitment into the herd being better is reduced. So we really want to keep a breeding population of between 6 and 10, 11 years old. Our mature stags want to be in that. As soon as they're older than that, the fact that they're big and impressive
They've done their
quite
bit.
often means that they'll hold those hinds because they'll fight off younger stuff, but they probably won't cover them very effectively.
Sure.
So,
Cool.
we might be looking for a really old stag like that. We might find something that's a bit younger, so he might be 6 or 7 years old, but he's genetically weaker or he's in poorer condition, and that might be the animal that we look for today. The beauty of this time of year is that the stags are in larger groups, so you can look through. Yesterday it was a group of 55 stags that we took an animal out of, so you know that you're selecting, hopefully, the best stag that you can from a herd management point of view and to improve that herd.
I like
and hopefully
that.
it's a nice old animal for you to take home as well.
Perfect. I'm excited.
We all are.
So there's a few really different characteristics of stalking for stags that have already emerged compared to elk hunting in the United States. One is that your ghillies carry the rifles. And that's something that's very foreign to me. It's always been a matter of pride to carry my own rifle up and down the mountain. But I appreciate it, guys. They're taking good care of them, keeping them dry and safe. And then, Sam, you'd asked a few minutes ago, you'd be very interested in hearing how this was different from our elk hunting. So one of the big things is you've mentioned the stags tend to feed until 10 or 11, depending on the time of year. And then they'll bed on these big open faces to stay out of the midges where the wind sweeps over them and so forth. If this was elk hunting in the Rocky Mountains on public land, the elk go dormant around daylight. Even during the rut, they'll only stay active usually until an hour or two after daylight because they're quite pressured. And they won't almost ever bed out in the open. They'll find a north-facing slope with heavy timber where it stays cool during the daytime, and they'll tuck into there where they're out of sight. Hunters can't find them, and they stay cool when that sun wraps around and heats up that arid western country. So there's already some pretty cool differences. This is just shaping up to be a fantastic adventure.
So we're going into, as Sam says, sneaky mode here. We've climbed out of the bottom of a canyon. On the far side of that canyon from a ridge, we spotted a great big bachelor group of red stags, including what we think are some good old bulls. So we spent the morning, it's about noon, zigzagging our way up the mountainside. We believe they're bedded over the ridge, or at least somewhere in that area on the far canyon. So we're gonna circle around, keep the wind in our face, try and work in and see them before they see us, yeah?
It's generally the plan, yes.
Excellent.
That would be a glen here, not a canyon. So you'd see we'd come out of that small glen.
No mistake. We found what looks like a pretty good herd of red stags with an old bull in it. So we're about to try and crawl across a basin. There's not much cover, but we got to give it a shot. If we can close the distance by about 200 or 250 yards, we'll be in range. We'll be able to judge whether or not to try and take a shot.
There he is.
Here we go. As soon as he stops.
Perfect. Tell them.
Which one is he?
With the group. He's higher than everything else, but he's going to die, I think.
He's second from the back now.
Yeah, he's just fallen over. He's dead. His head's up, but he's dead.
Nicely done, my friend.
Keep going anywhere.
Wow. Oh, that's cool. That is beautiful. Thank you, my friend.
My pleasure.
Fulfilled a lifelong dream right here.
Have a little handshake, boys.
Yeah.
Nah, he's a goodie.
Oh, that's terrific. Wow.
That's a very decent Highland stag.
He's been around just a day or two.
Thanks, Rob.
12?
Well, that's a nice picture, actually.
And that is pretty much your classic Kildamore Royal. He's old, he's going back. He's probably been a better stag in his day.
Fantastic. Rob, thank you for making this happen.
Team effort. Team effort.
And folks, I've just fulfilled a lifelong dream, a bucket list item, thanks to my good friend Rob Gearing of Spartan Precision Equipment, who invited me to come hunt one of his favorite haunts in the Highlands of Scotland. What a terrific experience. This is an old stag, even though to me he looks giant. He looks like as good a trophy as I could ever hope to take. He's Sam, the intrepid stalker, tells me he's 11, possibly 12 years old, on the decline, probably not successfully breeding anymore, so he's a perfect animal to take. Crawled into position, waited well over an hour, laying among millions of midges, little tiny, almost invisible gnats. You can probably see them in the air around us. They do bite. I got them in my ears and my sinuses. I just about choked on one, and I think that's what made us start throwing hats in the air. And finally, this bull stood up and gave us a shot at just over 200 yards. Made a clean one-shot kill with a 127 grain Barnes LRX bullet out of Rob's 6.5 Creedmoor. A nice Socko rifle with a Swarovski scope on it. Just couldn't have gone down better. I am tremendously grateful for this experience in this animal. Here in Scotland, in the Highlands, hunting red stags, and I really wanted to research the cartridges that the Scots use on stags. Now, something that's important to note is that even though these are a close cousin to our American elk, they're much smaller. They're really about the size of a big mule deer. And so I got to thinking back, what really created the American trend toward modern high-performance cartridges? It was a 30-06, which was the first really efficient, effective, authoritative, bottlenecked cartridge that shot bullets of heavy enough diameter, adequate velocity to take elk with authority. Well, what was it inspired by? And what did our cousins across the pond here use before it on red stag? And of course, red stag around the world varies greatly in size and body size, and in some areas nearly as big as our American elk. Well, the 7x57 Mauser was almost certainly the one. And on these big estates here in Scotland, it's still seen on occasion, even though it has kind of faded into the background. But at one time, it was probably considered one of the ultimate choices, and certainly kicked off a series of cartridges that reign today in the red stag and the elk hunting woods. One of the most popular here on this estate is the 270. As we Americans know, that's been a great cartridge for deer and sheep size game since Jack O'Connor wrote about it so eloquently. I use this rifle right here belonging to my good friend Rob Gearing. It's a Socko 85 chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. On my red stag, used an all copper bullet by Barnes because it gives adequate penetration from any reasonable shot angle, and it did a good job. It's an interesting thing looking back to see where the origins of the modern trends began. And it's been a lot of fun being over here hunting, learning about their preferences, and kind of substantiating my foregone conclusion that the 7x57 began it all.